Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'll try to make my comments very quick, but just to give you a little bit of an overview of where we are at the industry today. The title, Brave New World, for some people in the industry might well be Reckless New World. That's because at these current prices and at the current lack of investments, the future is indeed on thin ice. Just how risky is the outlook? I've put up a few highlights of where we are today. I hope you can all see them. I can because I have a copy of them. So when we look at what has happened since November, the investments in the upstream are down $150 billion. Wood Mackenzie has reported 46 major projects totaling $200 billion have been shelved. In Canada, $59 billion of projects have been deferred. Impairment, which is the market recognition of the actual true value of companies, has penalized North American companies mainly by $60 billion. The offshore drilling is down 30% on semis. The onshore rigs that drill for oil in the US currently is lower than the number on the slide. It's closer to 600. And when I hear, as some of the panelists have been saying, that the US production will go down 500,000 barrels, I find that a day, I find that rather optimistic. Our own numbers are more like 1.5 million barrels a day by the end of 2016. And of course, the massive layoff of employees reported 176,000 oil field layoffs since as of mid-year 2015. So this kind of raises the question, do we need a reality check? Are we in a new normal that is not sustainable? We heard about the growth in demand, about 1.5 million barrels, maybe more, next year due to lower prices. Nobody talks about declines anymore, but all major fields have intense declines. These must be replaced annually. If you cut expenditures, cut capex, declines accelerate. But at least 4 to 5 million barrels a year of declines that must be replaced with projects. There's always talk of spare capacity, but what is spare capacity? How sustainable is spare capacity? Is it short term for a few weeks, a few months, or is it long term? Yes, there is an overhang of inventory, but that will not replace a sustained increase in demand. Finally, just a few numbers on cost. My friends from Morgan Stanley and Boston Consulting Group reviewed 75 companies and their financials for 2013-2014. They found that the full cycle cash cost averaged $48.5. That's on a per barrel basis. The cost of capital was $14 on a per barrel basis. So that's a total of $63 per barrel. That's cost. That doesn't have margins. Now, you can cut cost, perhaps 5, 10%, but that's still no margin. And you have to convince the banks and the financial institutions to fund the multi-billion-dollar projects that everybody expects. So with those few comments, I'll turn this over to our panelists. Each panel member will maybe give us a few minutes of their own impression of the industry. We'd like to handle questions such as, how has the landscape changed for the oil industry? Does deep cost cutting affect operational flexibility? Does it affect reliability and safety? Are there sufficient investments, given all these realities, to take care of future demand? I would have added another question here is, can OPEC cover the shortfalls if, in fact, all these underinvestments happen? what happened to frontier developments, what happens when the industry has to write down reserves that are no longer commercial. And finally, how can we retain the talent and the creativity of the professionals who are leaving by the droves? So with that, I'll turn the panel over to Helge. I'm not going to introduce the speakers. You have the names and the bios in your program. I'll just pass it on, and we'll then open it for questions. Helge?
Okay, thank you, Sadad. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Great to be here. A few blocks from here, Sir Winston Churchill said it so well. Success is never final. Success is never final. And I think we have experienced that, all of us. And today, E&P finds itself as a point where we need to adapt or else. That was another British scientist who said. And Bob Dudley, BP's chief, said, nobody believes that the $100 per barrel cavalry is going to ride into town to save us anytime soon. We have to fix this ourselves. But first, there's a book by Simon Sinek called Start with Why. So I'll start with why this industry is so great in spite of the low point we are at now. So on the average in 2015, we team up, all of us, and we produce 94 million barrels a day, every single day this year. 350 billion cubic feet of gas. To do that, we drill 70,000 wells. We invest between 700 billion and a trillion. And the energy we produce together raises 150 million people out of poverty. It lifts living standards, and it fuels human progress. This is what we do every day this year, including today. And you see the ExxonMobil ad. It says, this gives you the right to put making the world a better place in your job description. And kudos to you for that. The yin and yang of E&P that we belong to is collaboration and competition. We compete fiercely, particularly in the access phase. We just had a very competitive round in Mexico on September 30th. But also, you have to look far to find a more collaborative industry. Look, we are together here sharing points of view. And of course, I have been the president of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, SPE, this last year. We have 143,000 members in 147 countries. So everybody working for you, I venture to say that every reservoir engineer in all your companies, they're a member of SPE, they publish papers, they've been to our meetings, and they have been sharing massively the greatest and latest incremental and radical technology that you have out there. So this is where I come from. Our narrative in SPE is, of course, that in these times of cost cutting, you cannot afford not to be a member. You cannot afford not to go to an SPE meeting. Up in Scotland, you have these castles, so you can take out the drawbridge and sit alone in your office. How many good ideas do you get? Compare that to going to a meeting of like-minded, where you hear new things, you learn new tricks, you can go home and boost value in your companies. So we feel strongly that SPE is a rising tide that lifts all the boats when it comes to technology, best practice, the latest and the greatest. And we just finished in Houston what we call the annual fall meeting. We had 12,500 people from all over the world. And if you went there, I think you went home with so much what I call 2.0 in terms of how to do the business. Everything we do in E&P takes a village. You know the term, it takes a village. Most of the villagers are happy these days because the gas price when you fill the tank is cheaper. That's good. But many are hurting. You have the service companies, you have the oil companies, and so on. We are hurting because we have what we call a rhapsody in C. I play the piano. I always look for things to call it that way. The competitiveness of the industry has been eroded. We're cutting CapEx. We're cutting people. College graduates that I meet wherever I travel, they say, you told us to join this industry. We went to school. Now we finished. We can't find a job. In the US alone, 1,800 students finished this year with a bachelor. We told them to do it. What can we do? We cannot find a job to them. So I advise them the best we can. Communities, another C, expect more from us. And we talked about another C, climate change. So what we have to do, in my view, is to come up with E&P 2.0. My vision is that we need to be safer, cheaper, quicker, more sustainable, and with a higher return. And technology plays a big part of it, and we have to become what I call fit at 50. And to do that, you know the TV program Extreme Makeover? You come in with a rundown house, the family goes away, the family comes back. This is what we have to do with E&P. We need an Extreme Makeover E&P edition so that we again become fit at 50. It's kind of like yellow cab is not good enough anymore. Compare that to Uber. Every element of the E&P value chain, we have to go from yellow cab to Uber to do better. Almost done in my 4 minutes. And to do this, I think we have to all fly in a V. You know, many have studies when geese fly. How do they do it? They fly a lot longer. There is synchronicity. There is cooperation. Operators almost always fly in front, right? They're the lead bird. But in there, you have the regulator, you have the treasury, you have the service companies, you have all of them. And in order to reach this destination that I call fifth at 50, we have to fly in a V together. One more thing. Darwin said adapt or else. There's something called Darwin's blind spot. Darwin's blind spot is collaboration. I think that collaboration is so fundamental any way you look at it going forward that is going to be a new competitive advantage. Survival of the fittest is more and more going to mean survival of the best collaborators. We'll get back to that in detail. So concluding then, I think together we record huge successes every day, as I mentioned in the beginning, even if the return has been hurting. The E&P industry has a great future. We'll get back to that as well. It has to do with global decline. In almost everything I can think of, we are better together going forward. So to me, collaboration 2.0 is going to be a key theme, and that's where we come in as PE, because we're sharing, and that's our main mission. Thank you.
Ali, you represent a major international oil company. How do you perceive the outlook?
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone. I've been in this business 40 years. And coming to this conference every year, and I know the topic changes. We will talk about $100 oil price, how we manage $100 oil price. Now we're talking about low cycle. This is a business that goes through the cycle. Anybody doesn't believe in that need to start believing it. We're going to go through the cycle. We already gone through it in the last 20, 30 years, 4 times, and it's going to continue to go through the cycle. The main thing in here is how we can adjust and adapt to the new environment. If you look at it in the last 10 years, do you know how many oil prices was greater than $100? Only once, one short period of time. Do you know how many times it was between 80 and 100? Only twice. Most of the time was average somewhere between 70 and so forth. That's how we've been running our business. We never run our business at $100. We never do that. You're very much looking on that upside. But let me fundamentally build on that one, how we see the future. When you're in this type of cycle, you got to look at the long term. Fossil fuel is everywhere. Look at around you. Everything you are looking at is built from fossil fuel. Therefore, oil and gas is going to be here for a long time. Alternative fuel is going to be supplementing. But as far as we see it, it's going to be around, and it's going to provide what the population growth require and what the standard of living continue to grow. The fossil fuel is going to be there. Therefore, the demand is going to continue to grow. The demand is growing at about 1 million barrels a year. But the natural resources are declining somewhere between 3% if you assume you continue funding your base business, to if you decided not to fund anything. If you decide not to fund anything, it would be 15% decline. It's a natural decline. Therefore, we constantly got to look for the resource to replace it. Do we have enough resources? Absolutely. Unconventional in the United States was a technology breakthrough, capital stewardship, and so forth brought 4 million barrels into the market. Are there additional resources? Definitely. And that's going to impact the production. The only thing is, these different asset classes require different type of investment. There are barrels in the deep water, but it costs about $70 to $80 to develop it. Unconventional requires somewhere between 40 to 50. If you look at Saudi Arabia or Iran, much lower development. Therefore, the aggregated asset class is going to dictate the price. Now, the short period of time is always to us is a blip that something happened. I personally believe the reason we are having this kind of imbalance of supply and demand is, look at the chart. Suddenly, large spare capacity came into the market. It was unconventional from the United States, 4 million barrels. A country was importing, become an exporter. But that's going to take a while to adjust itself. Therefore, when you look at the long term, the demand is going to continue to grow, the resource is there, and require prices. What that prices would be, market going to dictate that, and we've got to be prepared for that. On the short cycle is all about capacity. I totally agree that eventually the investment going to be cut back. Since last year, $150 billion has been cut back. If the prices stay the way it is, 2016 budget for all the company going to be lower than 2015. When there is no money, that means major capital project going to be delayed. Right now, we're actually harvesting on some of the major capital projects that the FID was decided 4 or 5 years ago. Therefore, the impact has not been seen. Wait another 2 years. When the project don't get FIDs, you're going to see more impact in the production. The demand and supply are going to balance itself out. It's a short period of time, but the frequency of that is going to be very difficult to predict. When is going to be the next low cycle of price? I assure you there will be one, but I don't know when. Since we cannot predict when, we better be prepared for it. And to be prepared, it means we've got to be efficient. We've got to be able to pull back in our industry when we have to. I think the industry was responsible. Last year, as soon as the price is going down, cut back on the C&E, capital investment. $150 billion gone out of $700 billion. If it continues to stay here, another 150 come out. All those have an impact in their future production.
Okay.
Short term, things doesn't look bright, but it's going to go away. Long term looks pretty good. Thank you.
There's going to be a lot of questions about that, Ali, I'm sure. But I think we need to hear from Emilio about a major national oil company and its plans under this market environment.
Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here this morning. Well, Pemex being the national oil company in Mexico is like all our collaborators or competitors we're facing a challenging time. When the government crafted the energy reform that is under implementation 2 years ago, we clearly did not expect these prices to be around. But what I would like you to take as a message is, if at all, current market circumstances are accelerating the pace of the implementation of the energy reform in Mexico. We're a different animal. We're a monopoly for 75 years. So this process is, we're trying to utilize the bad times to accelerate and focus on efficiencies and margins. In the case of the industry in Mexico, 21 laws were changed, a number of regulations, 2 bidding rounds carried out by the regulator have been already announced and carried out. One on exploration blocks was successful in terms of the first test to the market. In particular, the second one on development blocks was much more successful in terms of the quantity of blocks awarded. And Pemex is not absent of these changes. We have announced as well about $5 billion cuts in our capex. And this is obvious, as Ali was mentioning. We need to be much more cautious about when we do these investments. But overall, in the case of Pemex, we will continue to increase our focus on the much more higher margin activities. Our upstream activities are still highly profitable before taxes. Our all-in cost per barrel is around $23, $24. It's going on. The cost of production is going to stay stable for us, or at least we anticipate so. And we will continue to be focused not on the short term, but on the medium and long term. We have a very good reserve base. We plan to develop it with third parties. And the name of the game for us in particular considering the difficult market circumstances, is we need to share risk. We need to collaborate. And in terms of accelerating the pace of implementation of the reform, it means to carry out joint ventures across the whole value chain. In particular, in the upstream, we will go ahead with the farm outs that we had announced. We will actually soon come out with additional fields where we plan to farm out. And we will also utilize additional financing structures that the law allows us today, which is risk-taking in some of our fields without necessarily doing a farm out, so-called incentivized contracts, where we can work with service companies and they can also share some of the performance risk or operational risk. So all in all, we are not losing focus. We cannot be affected just by a year or two. The cycle of this industry is much longer, and we need to take that long-term vision in the way that we move forward. In particular, we've also done everything that was needed and that we had announced in terms of our internal restructuring. We have spun off 5 businesses. We have merged 3 of our large downstream activities. The government has announced some type of MLPs, we call it Fibra E, in order to monetize a lot of our midstream assets and utilize that capex for the upstream. So we're not losing focus. Obviously, it's a challenging time, but I would say what is promising is that as the industry has opened in Mexico and new upstream companies are coming in, Pemex sees this as a very positive sign, not only for the government's perspective, but also the interest that we continue to see for partnerships with Pemex to increase production.
Great. Bernard, you're one of the companies where the rubber hits the asphalt. How do you see the outlook?
So I speak on behalf of the foot soldiers of the industry, what I normally characterize as the plumbers. We are, depending on how you look at it, the front line or the canary in the coal mine. Whatever happens to us first, and ultimately the turn comes with us first. So, given our past, and given the fact we were born in a recession or a depression of 86, 87, I would say we probably are the most attuned to the rhythm of cycles than any of our peers. I got to tell you, this one is recession or depression, depending how you want to characterize it, is both the same and different. It is the same because the path to value, which was the question asked, is really cost and consolidation for people like us. Cost and consolidation. This is the same thing. It is different in a number of respects. And maybe it's interesting to tell you what are the respects, because it has the seeds of implications for the future. It's different because first the brutality of the cost side. I haven't seen anything like that since perhaps '99. Sadad put some numbers which were mid-year. I suspect by year-end it'll be between 250,000 to 300,000 people who are gone. That's a lot. Ourselves, from the time we started till the end of the year, perhaps early next year, the entire payroll will be down by 40%. That's with a 4. That is a lot, by any measure. And this is just an example of what is going on. So the brutality on the cost side I think is exceptional. The speed at which the actions were taken is also unusual. When oil goes down and so forth, there is a certain lag, and then things happen. Here it happened immediately. So again, the speed and also the breadth. Although North America took the brunt of the pain, I think the pain is spreading internationally, fast. By the end of the day, looking at ourselves again as just a microcosm of what's going on, although probably 60% or so of the cuts will end up being in North America, 40% will be in the rest of the world, which is more than half of what we do. So 40% is not 4%. It's a big chunk of the cutbacks. This is really brutal. Consolidation. Well, So obviously, when we say consolidation, we talk immediately about the two large transactions that took place, are taking place, which is Haldorsen acquiring Baker Hughes and Schlumberger acquiring Cameron. Actually, these transactions, and it's not for me to, to talk about them because we're not the ones doing them, these transactions to a degree are, I think, ancillary to the consolidation, meaning that they're not directly caused, best I can tell, by the events in the industry, just happen to coexist. There is quite a bit of consolidation out of necessity coming, predominantly in North America now, in the next 6 to 9 months. I'm not saying this because we will be part of it. No. I'm saying this as an industry observer, an industry player. North American consolidation is coming simply out of distress. And so why is that different? Well, what is different is not so much what I've just described. This is, what is different, this is why I want Rid to maybe spend a minute thinking about it, is that it is happening to a segment of the industry which is so small. I'm referring to how many of us are left. When I say how many of us are left, what do I mean? If you sort of squint, break down the industry, the plumber industry, if you're generous, plumbers with technology, right? If you break it down, you have the service companies that can do worldwide work. How many will be left? 3? With differential in size, us being much smaller, 2.5 maybe, yeah? Look at the equipment players, people who make things. In the end, there's only 2 large ones left. The other ones are very fine companies, but they're small. Then you have the rig companies that are in the world of their own. Then you have North American companies. When we started in the business, and later on in our lives, the oilfield service industry had so much more players. I won't bore you with the names of so many that have disappeared, but a great many. Now, why is that important? After all, consolidation is a good thing. It is. But the reason why it's important is ultimately the burden of being of help, the burden of being of support, the burden of being of value falls on fewer people, far fewer people. And these people, of which we are one, are going to be even more furiously looking at their cost structure. Because I assure you, the oilfield service and equipment industry, and certainly Weatherford, will find a way, there'll be a few quarters lag, to ultimately adjust and adjust and adjust and adjust until we are not only profitable, we have a return on capital. We have no choice. So what it means really is the people on the front line will be forced by the laws of nature, if you call the markets nature, by the laws of nature, will be forced to adjust until in fewer hands, far fewer hands, we are so lean and so efficient, we actually can adjust to any pricing environment. It can be done. It is rapid evolution. We don't have the time that Darwin envisioned in his observations on the evolution of life. We will adjust very quickly, and it will happen. Now, at one level, that makes me very happy. Of course. Why? Well, after all, we're here for the pursuit of plenty, meaning, create wealth. If we adjust and we're profitable, and I mean profitable enough to have a return, ultimately we will accomplish, the pursuit of value. We've done that at the cost of scale and extreme focus, meaning we're smaller, and the cost structure has been hacked. And, after all, we are a growth industry, oilfield service, oddly enough. This is not the time or the place to talk about the increase in use of tools per barrel, per molecule, based on the size of the reservoirs, the types of reservoirs you go after, et cetera, and the unconventionals. All of this and it's true. So a growth industry because of that, year in, year out, and a growth industry also because of the trends in consumption, demography. Again, I won't belabor points that will be raised by others. 1.5 to 2 billion people will join the planet between now and the next 25 years, give and take. And remember, demography is destiny. You know this. No. The reason why I'm optimistic is that, supposing what I just said is not true, the oilfield service industry will do well regardless once it's adjusted. Of course. That's called, that's called evolution for survival. But then let me ask you a question. There is a word that is so seldom spoken. No, it's not a very mystical word. It's called elasticity. Elasticity to what? Elasticity to price. Price of what? To the price of the hydrocarbon. What does that mean? How fast can our industry respond when it goes north as opposed to south? All I've said here is that we will do everything we need to do to adjust on the way down. We already have, with extreme brutality on fewer hands. What about the elasticity on the up? Well, clearly, we are hungry for volume, aren't we? Plumber always is. And so at one level, I would agree with this, which is equipment, people, and capital will rush back when the price of oil corrects. But what does rush back mean? Do we really know how fast it can happen? And with this fewer hands and much shrinkage, can we really have the kind of elasticity everyone presumes that we will have? I'm not so sure. I also mentioned something else, which is perhaps more controversial, but it's something I've observed. Extrapolation is a great form of forecasting, except it never works. I used to study and teach forecasting, so I know it doesn't work. Although it's a beautiful practice called econometrics. Okay. Orthodoxy tells you today that who is the swing producer in the world? No, it is not the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it is the United States, right? This is what's so delicious about the orthodoxy today. Is it true? Well, certainly there's infrastructure, right? There is infrastructure in the US. It's still there. You're not in the middle of the desert and things of that nature. You're not fighting in deep water and so forth and so on. Infrastructure is there. People are there. So clearly, the US can be a swing producer with high elasticity to pricing. But is that true? I would question that. I would question that on the basis that the scars, or if you were in the financial issues, the beta, what has happened. Last year, end of last year and this year, and possibly next year, I don't know. The scars are deep. The scars are deep on the operating side. The scars are deep on the financial side. Surely, Wall Street will rush to provide capital to the US when price goes back up. Well, I'm not Wall Street. But I will tell you this. I think the quantity and the generosity of capital coming back in the US, I would just put forth for your consideration, may not be as generous as it was. That doesn't mean there won't be any. In the end, the difference is on the delta. A little less makes a big difference. Therefore, this assumption that the US is a swing producer, which really, when you have sort of, many of us here spent our lives in the industry, all my distinguished colleagues here have. So it's delicious. Now the US is the swing producer. 10 years ago, it was basically home for the dying. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting as a swing. Makes life interesting. But perhaps we've gone a bit too far in assuming you can turn back on the US and boom, another 1 million barrels a day turns up. Not only the unconventionals are not as easy to turn on and turn off, but furthermore, what I call the scars, which you might call the beta factor, which is the permanent cost in perceived volatility, makes it a little bit harder to rely on that. So we will have a word of caution, ultimately, on the whole industry, on expecting too much, too fast out of the US.
Well, thank you, Bernard. That was a dose of realism. I think in the interest of time and in order to give everybody a chance to delve into this wealth of experience, we'll just go straight into questions rather than us asking each other what probably should be coming from the audience. So, just wait for the microphone. Please identify yourself and make it a question.
Hi, hello, it's Martin Ratz. I'm with Morgan Stanley. The gentleman from Pemex said that all his projects are still very profitable before tax, and that seems to be true around the world. And in the years of the oil price upswing, governments seem to have taken a considerable chunk of the incremental rent that upstream projects have created. If you dive into that list of 75 companies that Mr. Sadad earlier highlighted, if you take out the super majors, the Shells, the Exxons, the BPs, pay about $23 in tax for every barrel of oil equivalent produced, or at least they did so in 2014. If you take out of that group of 75 the ones that are US domestic E&Ps, they pay about 4. So there is a huge difference between international tax and US tax. One of the reasons it seems to me why US shale has turned out to be so successful and resilient is just that the US turns out to be one of the single most advantaged tax regimes in the world. So my question to the panel is more or less this. Is the sort of the fit at 50 sort of objective, is that achievable without also governments sort of chipping in this downturn and doing something about tax, given that projects are still very profitable for tax? And also, if so, are you seeing anything on this front?
Thank you. I guess that's for you, Emilio. You're the tax man.
I just think it's important for governments, this includes the Mexican government, to give clarity and consistency to the tax regimes. I can only speak for what I see in Mexico, which is there's full transparency in the way that the auctions are being carried out. And, well, companies are paying up high government takes for what I believe is the most important issue, which is rule of law, long-term clarity, and obviously some infrastructure or local infrastructure where you don't have to build everything from scratch. I can only speak for that, but in general, I think this is good for the industry, that even those other countries that are trying to revamp their industries make a double effort to make sure that long-term capital can be deployed there with confidence.
Any other questions?
Can I
Yeah.
just add to that?
Briefly, yes.
Yeah, if you look at the distribution of age of people in our business, you have a twin peak situation. The peak 1 has an average of 30 years, peak 2 has an average of 55 years. The estimate by Mercer, the HR consultant, is that 50% of those working in E&P today will leave the industry the next 5 years. So kind of peak 2 is leaving altogether. So back to the rebalancing of government take versus investor take, that is necessary also in order to keep the workforce working on projects. So I think in this village that I talk about, it takes a village. A key constituent in that village are the authorities, and they have to come in and rebalance when necessary, government take versus investor take.
Thank you. It's Lydia Rainforth from Barclays. If I could just come back to the point that Helge made earlier about collaboration, are you actually now seeing in the lower oil price environment more willingness to work between the large oil companies and the service companies, perhaps more standardization, more simplification? Because certainly the impression from an investor side is that perhaps projects got a little too complex over the past few years.
Helge?
Yeah, I can have a go, although of course I'm SB and not the company Statoil today. But yes, I'm seeing that. Let me give you some examples. If you take here in the UK, you had a Wood report, and they are talking about competition taking the back seat to collaboration because you create more value with collaboration than you do with competition. For example, to share helicopters and to have the same line to transport the oil. There are so many things you can do. When it comes to frontier, you see companies teaming up to come up with 20,000 PSI and 450 Fahrenheit equipment so that they can fight for the pie later, but equipment has to be made, kind of a lifting by 4 or 5 companies. So in mature regions and in frontier regions, you see stuff teaming up. Collaboration 2.0 is happening, in my view. And one more thing, the capping stack after Macondo, you've seen how industry has teamed up to have that available all over the world should something similar happen. So maybe some of you could do standardization.
Ali, do you see more cooperation?
Well, term collaboration is a fancy word to use. The cost of goods and services is sky high during the high prices. That's the reality. The reason development costs grown significantly is because we are a management company. We've got to rely on the service company, service provider, construction company to put things together. Cost of goods service has gone up significantly. Oil prices dropped by 50%. International costs of goods and services only dropped by 5%. If project going to move ahead, the cost of goods and services has to come down. Whether or not it's through collaboration, through handshaking, whatever it is, there's not going to be more major capital project going to be FID if the costs of goods and services stay the way it is today. Absolutely not. We can manage developing resources that require $70 when oil price is 50. Therefore, I don't know the term collaboration. I think there would be collaboration definitely on the technology, on certain area. But when it comes down to the business, rather than collaboration is understanding. That's more important than collaboration. We've got to have a clear understanding what does it take to bring the cost of goods and services down to the level to support the prices there. If it's not there, we're going to continue to cut back on the CNE. That's the reality.
Yeah, Emilio?
I think a critical issue to tackle, call it collaboration or however you want to call it, is standardization as per your question. In the case of Pemex, we see a lot of our projects just going off the chart in terms of cost because even internally, our own engineers want something specific for their own projects. And in discussions with other colleagues from the upstream industry, we've realized that it is the same also in their organizations. And I think it merits, and something is already cooking from what I perceive with my discussion with other IOCs in terms of how we approach service companies and engineering companies, at least to look at standardization in some equipment that is obvious. It's like you would have the same model of car with different windows or different wheels. It really doesn't make sense. So there is clearly room to cut down costs in terms of collaborating in the way that we approach some of the equipment procurement. Yeah.
So I think there's always a silver lining to everything. Sometimes it's hard to find, but there always is. I would say this: never mind whether this assessment is correct or not, but should the environment of low prices and perhaps even lower, I don't know, go on for an extended period of time, you will absolutely see a very virtuous period, cycle, if you will, of collaboration. I don't like that word particularly, but I think of sharing of ideas and standardization, etc., between IOCs, NOCs, and the service companies. Why am I saying you need an extended period of time? Because this doesn't happen quickly. What happens quickly is really basically price cost, boom, volume. It's brutal, very much like a screen. It's not green, it's red, it goes down. Bang, there's a reaction, which is what I was. But then afterwards, when there is a realization that perhaps this is the state of affairs and so forth, I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm just stating that as a scenario. Then I think a number of companies make a real effort to, one, become leaner themselves, I'm referring to clients now, and two, look at manners in which they can run their operations, the logistics, differently. Now, why don't they do this in growth times? The human soul does better in hardship. It's just a fact. When things are easy, we don't try as hard. We're just busy trying to meet the volume increases that we're supposed to deliver. So we're all busy trying to scale up in a not too inefficient manner. In hardship, actually, it's probably why hardship exists. Hardship, is, to a degree, is actually good for you. I hate to say that, because I don't like hardship, don't get me wrong. But I could absolutely see a number of our clients, including many who are on this panel here today, who have already gone a significant step forward in looking at ways in which to run what they're running with the same quality, possibly higher quality, same safety, possibly higher safety, same performance, possibly higher performance, but much lower use of human capital and so forth and so on. And it just takes time. It's one company at a time, etc. Remember the comment that we are all collaborative as an industry and so forth, but all fiercely independent. Each company feels they can do these things a little bit differently, a little bit better.
But isn't there a point, I just might interject here, that we're ignoring? That if you're going to have a government that wants $23 a barrel, and it's not there, and if you're going to need to cut costs, but you're already down to the bottom line, I mean, after all, these companies are very professional. There is inflation, but not that much inflation. So isn't the bottom line then a reduced investment, which is what we've been looking at, lower cost on the capital side, and therefore less supply? Do you anticipate a shortage of supplies maybe in 2017?
Yeah,
Anybody?
I'll do the decline argument that we heard already today. So we produce 94 today, and then every year it goes down by 4 to 6 million barrels a day, depending, right? That means that in 2020 you have a gap of 20 million barrels to fill. If you add then demand growing by 1 million per day, in fact, so that's 25. That's 2.5 Saudi Arabias that we have to come up with during the next 5 years. And the projects to do that, we're stopping now for the reasons we just talked about. This is why so many believe that, yes, it could be lower for longer, but fundamentally, we are coming back. So this is why I said I believe in the long-term greatness of this industry.
Ali, how do you see it?
Well, I totally agree with what is said in here. We're going to go through a high price cycle as well. I mean, that all this impact of cutting back on the CNE, you're going to see that there is going to be a lack of a spare capacity, price going to go up. But the question is, when that's going to happen? And at 2020, some people said 2017, 2018. You can't bet on that. You got to be prepared for it. And what my company is doing, we're building that efficiency that both my colleagues pointed out. Efficiency, coming up with the standard processes, the standard equipment, efficiency in the people and so forth, to basically prepare for it if it lasts more than 2 years, 3 years. But I think we're going to go to the high price cycle no matter what. We will be sitting here talking about that a few years down the road.
That's good news, Emilio, isn't it?
I agree here with my colleagues. I think hardship can be good in certain moments to focus on being ready for a higher oil price. Clearly, I think the longer it stays low, the quicker it will go up. And the question is, will organizations, will companies, will we as an industry be ready? I believe this moment or this year or an extended period of time is going to prepare us better. I'm optimistic about that.
More questions? Herman?
Herman Franson, EIG. I have a question in particular, maybe for Bernard, but the others could also comment on it. There's cost reductions and cost reductions. I think what is achievable, say, in the tide oil in the United States, we've seen 30, some cases 40%. There's huge excess of drilling rigs and people. On the other hand, you have ultra-deep water projects, which are extraordinarily capital intensive. So subsea completion systems, you name it. So maybe the panel could differentiate a little bit about the cost reductions possible for the relatively easy stuff, the tide oil, technically, and the more complex one as ultra-deep water.
Again, portfolio management, portfolio assessment, this is the time we go through it, and you're absolutely right. Take the ultra-deep water. Reducing the cost on the ultra-deep water within a short period of time is very difficult. We're never going to compromise on the safety. It's much more challenging. Those are the things you've got to consider that. Therefore, that's what I think eventually everyone's going to go through the portfolio management. Certain things are going to be pushed to the side because the price even come back to the higher price doesn't really push us very quickly to react to it. We've got to see a stabilized, high price environment for the project like ultra-deep water to be sustainable. That's my personal point of view. And most of the emphasis is going to be to the base business, low-cost production. We're going to increase it. The barrels that they already been discovered, and we can develop them faster through efficiency by infill drilling and so forth. Big companies, we do a portfolio assessment during the price cycle. We always, when the price is high, everything you can develop. Low prices, you got to go through that exercise.
Can I make a point about technology? I want to bring in technology again. I think you're right. When it comes to deep water, you just saw Statoil put down the subsea compression, the world's first in the North Sea. And of course, the ultimate is going to be a subsea factory. So you can save that platform that costs $2 billion because it's all on the seabed and sent to shore for processing that way. So if you look at the role of deep water in the Shell, BP, EIA, McKinsey scenario going forward, deep water is going to have a big role to play in order to meet the oil that we need. And I think you're going to see technology steps, not as quickly as you do onshore, where you can frack better and what have you, but gradually you're going to get the 2.0 of deep water, and that's going to cost less. One more point, and that's with drilling. Of course, the drilling cost in deep water are a very big chunk of the overall capex, maybe 50, 60, 70%. So if you can cut drilling by 30%, you save a lot of money and boost your NPV. And if you look at the progress we're doing now with, let's call it automated drilling, that you put the Watson or a Deep Blue type computer and you learn on the first couple of wells, and then you drill smarter on the next ones. I think this is an area of technology that will really boost the speed of drilling, just as safe, but that's going to cut you another 30%. So the role of technology in deep water is going to be very important for the long term.
So let me say
Yeah.
something about.
Would you like to comment?
Let me add some comments on tight oil. It's a very interesting topic. First, it's counterintuitive, but because what's going on right now is that the people who are producing tight oil successfully are probably will end up being the best in the industry, and they're also going to be nurturing the best zones, and ultimately keeping the best service companies. That's defined by performance, not only price. And of course, pricing in North America has gone down for services by about 30% on the weighted average basis. That's a lot. Okay. What is also happening is that, well, there needs to be a lot of science behind tight oil, and there isn't quite yet. And these same people I described will help move along the science behind tight oil. There's also been tremendous amounts of progress because of a trial and error. It was sort of, the tradition of the industry, it's not wildcatting, but I mean, it's the same cultural idea, trial and error. Fundamentally, tight oil has emerged because of trial and error. We talk about fracturing as being technology and so forth. Well, fracturing existed since Second World War, right? So it's, it's just how we frack and where we frack and how we isolate zones and so forth, horizontally. Well, that is clear. But it has been developed because of trial and error. There's far less trial and error going on now. Why? There's no money. I mean, the people who trial and error just don't have any money. And I think it's a combination of the science that follows trial and error, but not only the science that creates real progress in how to develop these tight oils. My point here is that trial and error will come down. And I'll add another point also, and I'll stop there. This is rather common in financial market. It seems to be this general comment that sort of tight oil has been very resilient. I mean, we react in terms of years. Tight oil is beginning to react now. What did people expect? That because the price went down and you pull some rigs off, boom, production would stop? How foolish. Financial markets look at reservoirs like a screen. Well, it isn't a screen. Reservoirs are known as financial market. And then, I think actually the response to the United States has been exactly what as service companies had anticipated. It's happening now, which is plenty early enough. This notion has been resilient. I think it's simply the expectations were terribly, non-operational in nature. The tight oil are responding exactly the way we thought tight oil would respond. They're responding now, and production is dropping, and will continue to drop in an accelerated manner. That's normal lag.
Any more questions? Because I have one or two. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Maurice Burns from the Boston Consulting Group. Bernard, earlier on you were talking a bit about the contraction in the oilfield services industry, taking costs out and potential consolidation. And you seem to be sounding a bit of a warning that when the demand does come back, when prices rise, the industry's ability to respond may be severely constricted. But given the cost pressures right now, what is the alternative? How else can companies respond?
So look, service companies have said forever that when they go through this sort of recession, that but when pricing goes back up, we won't be ready and all that kind of stuff. And when pricing comes back up, ultimately service companies want to work, and so nothing is new under the sun. In this respect, you can take my comment with a dose of skepticism, and I understand that. What I said actually is because it's a little bit different now. It's different perhaps because this is a depression, a recession of choice, which makes it dangerous in a way. Because what do I mean by that? Well, there's very, very little spare capacity. We all know this. We seem to accept this. seem to accept the fact that spare capacity will go away with complete, peace of mind. My point is simply that the elasticity of response better be quick, precisely because there's a recession or depression of choice, not one like in 99 and 86. Remember what happened in 09. I mean, the world was crashing, right? Here's different. I don't want to get into the reasons of the choice. It's not for me to say. But because it is a depression or recession of choice, and because we have no spare capacity really to speak of, very little, the assumption embedded in what everyone's thinking is that the elasticity of response will be very, very good. And that's my point. It's not the normal, saga of the oilfield service company, oh, it'll be so hard for us. Forget it. I agree with you, which I suspect is what you're thinking, which is, yeah, you'll do it when the time comes. And you're right. My point is the embedded assumption on how fast we have to respond, in my judgment, is not realistic given the depth and brutality of what we're doing to ourselves, which is good from an efficiency standpoint. My second comment also is this business of the US as a swing producer may be correct, or maybe not. But I will tell you one thing. The elasticity of response won't be as fast as people expect. Therein lies the problem. We are sort of in a world of, I don't know, benign optimism about the supply side. I don't know why. That's my whole point.
Last question, I think. And then we'll do some wrap-up comments, maybe.
My name is Philip Kladek. I'm with Bloomberg Intelligence. My question is, so the international oil majors, they're cutting capex mainly because they need to conserve the dividends for their shareholders. And as I understand, the national oil companies that don't have shareholders and don't need to pay dividends are not cutting capex. So are the international oil majors losing market share when the oil price comes up again and they don't have the projects online to produce, and the national oil companies will be back stronger when the oil price is up?
I guess that's partly Emilio and partly Ali.
Well, we respond, in our industry, we respond to the market. I mean, it's going to be what it's going to be. In this environment, we don't look at the net present value as much as we look at the cash flow. We've got to make sure our company is healthy, the balance sheet is strong, and move ahead. The consequence of that would be managing our portfolio and then managing the production. If you look at on aggregate, actually, the production of the total IOC depends on who you include, who you don't. But take the major one. Actually, in the last 10 years has declined. Despite of what we said that our production going up, with the money we spent, we're just basically managing what we have. Therefore, our market share in some extent going to fit where it's going to fit. The capacity of growing the production is going to be NOCs. Look at that. Saudi Arabia increased the production by 1 million barrels during the discussion whether or not we got to cut production or not. That would be very difficult to get the IOC to do that from capital stewardship point of view, from financing point of view, and so forth. For example, Pemex, I'm very optimistic Mexico can increase the production much quicker than any IOC. They've got access to resource, they've got a large portfolio, they can manage it. And again, we got a different responsibility, and our responsibility comes from the financial performance that drives the rest.
Emilio?
I would not like to generalize. In the case of Pemex, we're in a transition very well advanced from being an arm of the state or a state entity into something much more closer to a national IOC, call it, no? Just like Statoil or other national oil companies. So we're no longer focused on volumes. We're focused on the bottom line and in generating value. So therefore, we have announced some capex cuts. And we're very prudent in terms of the way we grow our debt. Actually, we're very involved in a process to monetize assets, midstream assets in particular, and plug that money into the upstream business, only into the more profitable areas of our upstream business. And we need to be very cautious about the way that we invest. So we're in a transition period, and we are optimistic about growing production, just as Ali mentioned, but not only utilizing our own money, but by partnerships.
Well, let me just summarize. I think we've got an interesting new concept, which is elasticity of the industry. As a underinvested currently industry and undermanned, and looking at the short term, we have lots of confidence in the midterm and long term, but looking at the short term and recognizing some of the factors that we did not discuss, the political issues, the instability in the global markets, the financial outlook, which again, we assume the money is there, but maybe it's not available. When we put all these factors together, you can be optimistic about the midterm, but the near term is certainly a very challenging outlook, and that's a subject for the future panels, I guess. Thank you very much. We've run out of time, and we'll leave it for the next panel to discuss these things.